Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome on behalf of the English Literary Society to the monthly lecture series talk, in which it is a special honor and a privilege to welcome my former teacher and Shubhra's former teacher, Professor Jayati Gupta, Jayati Di to all of us. A lot of what we teach in the classroom today is because of the training and knowledge that they have imparted to us. I mean, I still cannot go back and teach the restoration period without remembering how Jayati brought the restoration period alive for us and how she did Absalom and Achitophel with us. So these are, things that have stayed on with us, even though it's now nearly 28 years 28 years since I would have joined presidency. I mean, I had joined in 1994. So it's a long association. And I'm sure Jayati still thinks of us as those students, those bright-eyed kids who, who came into a classroom. And, our batch, Jayati, if you remember, we were a very unique batch because we had no boys. We were an all girls batch who had joined. So coming back, the English Literary Society of this college we are a very, very vibrant and active department. This year, we have started this monthly lecture series. And this is the 6th talk of that series. We've had talks on topics ranging from digital humanities and to travel writing, and in between we've had talks on diaspora, on post-colonial literatures, on popular detective fiction. So we've tried to encapsulate a wide variety, and hopefully, obviously with the last 2 years, all of us being housebound, we've not, these online talks have been one way in which we have kept our academic pursuits alive, and it's also actually opened up a lot of avenues for us to listen to a lot of people whom we would otherwise never have got the chance to do so. So and now that we are back in the physical space, and as soon as the COVID protocols arrive, we do hope to have Jayati back with us physically in the auditorium whenever she is in Delhi next time. But so far, I mean, I'm now going to hand over to Shubhra to take this forward. The principal will be joining us within the next 10 minutes. He said you can start the program. He's in another online meeting, and he's going to join us as soon as he gets free from there. Shubhra.
Thank you, Madhumita Di. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Jayati Gupta, Jayati Di, to all of us. She's an authority on European 18th century British literature, as well as European Enlightenment and travel writing. She will be introduced to us formally by Poonam Kaul, who will be chairing the session. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to welcome Jayati to our college. As Madhumita Di said, it's been an association. For me, it's an association of nearly 25 years. I joined Presidency College in 1996. And the academic foundations were laid by her. I still remember the copious notes I got on my tutorial of the Seafarer, and my intellectual debt to Jayati is immeasurable. So Jayati, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us today, and looking forward to the talk. Poonam, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you. I must admit I'm overawed by Professor Jayati Gupta's both scholarship and achievements. I'm going to read out a brief introduction. She has played a pioneering role in laying the foundation of the Department of English at the West Bengal State University. And she has spent almost 25 years. She was also a professor there. She spent almost 25 years of her 35-year teaching career at the erstwhile Presidency College, Kolkata, both as faculty and as the head of the department. She has taught at the University of Calcutta as guest faculty, and also has been the visiting professor at the Vishwa Bharati University in 2012. Also a visiting fellow at Delhi University in 2017. And there is this Centre for Travel Writing, part of Nottingham Trent University, UK, and she was invited to lecture there in 2010. Currently, she is the visiting faculty at Adamas University, Barasat, or Barasat. I'm not sure how it is pronounced. I hope to seek forgiveness for this. Shupra has already mentioned that her area of specialization is 18th century British literature and European Enlightenment. But her passion, not but anyway, her passion is researching and writing on travel literature. Her book, Travel Culture, Travel Writing, and Bengali Women, which was published by Routledge UK in July 2020, is based on her research work from 1870 to 1940. This is the period she has covered at the National Library, Calcutta, as a part of the prestigious Tagore National Fellowship for Cultural Research, which he was awarded by the Ministry of Culture from 2015 to 2017. She has also authored other monographs. One is Reading Poems, published by Macmillan, Narrative and Narration, published by Anthem Press, and an annotated edition of Moll Flanders, besides, of course, an edition of Hamlet in the Philip Weller series. She also translates from Bangla, and several of her translated stories have been included in Bashabi Fraser's A Collection of Partition Narratives, published by Anthem Press as lately as 2006, and another work called The Other Voice, published recently in 2013. And she has also contributed to the Dictionary of National Biography for Oxford in 2012, brought out in 2012. I will not, come in the way of the speaker and the rest of the listeners, and I'm very keen to listen to what she has to say and how travels, travelers, and travel writing has, helped in constructing, in their attempt to constructing India.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Poonam.
Not at all.
Madhumita and Shubhra, of course, my former students, for inviting me to your college, though it's virtually, inviting me to your college to deliver this lecture. You've been very kind in the generous introductions that you have, just put out for me. And without much wasting much time, and I also have to thank the principal and the IQAC coordinator for facilitating my lecture here. So without much ado, I think I will begin with my presentation, or begin with my talk. It's basically, with the students, for the students that I would be talking, and giving them a kind of broad overview and idea of what I mean by this constructing India. And so the theoretical part of it is going to be, very much ingrained into, whatever I say. I have used theory, but I'm not going to, really explain it here. So with that, I think we can go to the second slide, second meanings. I'll call that the first slide, because this is just the opening slide. So can I have the next slide?
Pranav?
Yeah. Now, I'm beginning this lecture with two Western formulations on travel writing. One of these, of course, most of you would have come across, Francis Bacon's essay of travel. There are these two passages on the screen. I would just, pick out the word education and experience, and, maybe entrance into the language. And it is not travel, he says, but education, which is, part of the Western notion. And of course, this is the 16th century that we are talking about, 16th, 17th century. Now, the second extract over there talks about the instructions, the do's and the don'ts of travel. And on the last, line that I have, part of that line which I have there, it says, let him keep also a diary. So the writing of travel or the documentation of travel, that is also, taken to be part of travel itself. Can we go to the next slide? That again is another passage from the same essay, in which Bacon talks about the influence of travel on the traveler. And he talks about the process of learning and change. But you have to notice that the change that he's talking about is in behavior, maybe dress, maybe habit, customs, in the discourse as well, all right? And in his discourse, rather his discourse than in his apparel and gesture. There could be some changes in, manners and etiquette, because after all, we must understand that when Bacon was writing, he was writing for the education of the English gentleman. And travel was identified as part of this education. And this is something which continues into the 18th century and the Grand Tour, where people went, especially from England to Italy, and they picked up their so-called polish, as it were, in these countries, watching, or seeing these sights and sounds. The other quotation, please, the next slide. The other quotation I want to share with you is by a philosopher and theorist, Todorov. And in this chapter entitled The Journey and His Narratives, he asks, these questions. What is not a journey? Then he says, journey coincides with life. Then he talks about it being a movement in space. He says that life and change are synonymous. And he also talks about the journey in space, which symbolizes the passing of time. So travel in this perception is entangled with philosophy, not just in the Occident, but more so in the Orient. Travel is embedded in the idea, and I'm just using one of these, by Devdutt Patnaik. He says, the impermanence of things. It's embedded in the idea of the impermanence of things, the rejection of the familiar, the constant embrace of the unfamiliar. So, that's a kind of philosophical perception. So what we are coming to is the fact that travel has been an intrinsic part of human civilization since time immemorial. Who were these travelers in these ancient times? There were the migrants, nomads, exiles, seafarers, explorers, conquerors, traders, pilgrims, buccaneers, pirates, slaves. So there were different communities of travelers all over the world. Now, these ancient travelers did not necessarily write travel texts or accounts, because that comes later, but oral stories were narrated. And it lived in the collective memory of the peoples, to be documented at various points of time in various kinds of forms. Let us go to the next slide. Before I get into the subject, I would begin with a few clarifications. Next slide, please. What could be called a travel narrative? Well, I would say that if we accept the definition of physical travel as movement through physical or geographical space, we can exclude perhaps the imaginary or metaphysical or metaphorical travel. Metaphorical travel like Dante's Inferno, Paradiso, and Purgatory and Paradiso, you know, that divine comedy, or even Pilgrim's Progress. So we are excluding that, where journey is being used as a motive. So we are limiting travel to real-time travel. So I'm going to talk of the spatial and the temporal dynamics of travel and how that is reflected in travel writing. So space and time become, you know, extremely important. The second question that I'm asking or trying to answer is travel writing a literary genre? And there has been a lot of conflict and a lot of, you can say, disparity in what one would, you know, think of as real travel writing. Now, travel writing or a travelogue was always popular, but it gained the dignity of a genre only as recently as the 1980s and 1990s. So what we have to understand by travel writing as a genre, even now, is that it's very flexible and it straddles many forms. And when I say many forms, it straddles autobiography, narrative or epic, poem, even a blog, I would say, a good, well-written blog. So travel writing is not a travel guide, you know, that differentiation has to be made, but a well-formed creative prose that can be called literature, as it records individual perceptions. A travel guide is informative, but it's not individualistic, it's not subjective. So that is one major difference when we talk of travel writing as a genre and we talk of the literary qualities. But the debate remains. So is travel writing literature? I strongly believe that it is. And in this, you know, freewheeling discussion, I will touch on books. I'll name books rather, some books that will support my idea. The third question that I'm asking is, how do we find a connection, one between travel and the traveler? Now, when one travels, there is a purpose, an intention. If not overtly, at least in the subconscious mind. Why am I going? Why am I traveling? And why I'm traveling to a particular place or a particular destination? So the traveler has a perspective, a way of witnessing things. In travel theory, this is called the gaze, the traveler's gaze. And that gaze gets reflected in the way one writes, in one's writing.
हाँ सर, मैं यही पूछ रही थी कि आप अभी
And then
बोलेंगे या उनके?
Who reads travel writing? So the potential traveler, maybe you want to go somewhere and you want to read. For example, we know of how Columbus had Marco Polo's, you can say, travels with him, that had inspired him, that had aroused his interest in, you know, unknown countries. So it could be the potential traveler or explorer, or even the armchair traveler. But we realize now that since travel writing is not just a mimetic, informative piece, it could also interest sociologists, ethnographers, anthropologists, and of course, adventurers. A whole range of people looking for knowledge, pleasure, excitement. So travel writing, even if we think of it as a genre, is a protean form. And that will become apparent from some of the examples that I would be going to. Next slide, please. So in the course of this talk, I have to be, we can go on to the next slide, only extremely selective, because my theme is constructing India. Why constructing? Because India is seen during different periods of time by a varied set of travelers through their own experiences, perspectives, and gazes. I can't go over everyone or everything. So I'm just taking up some examples of how this gaze or this perspective changed with history or with time or with personal, subjective interactions with the country. So if I were to use an analogy from physics, I would say that the narratives of travel emerge as centrifugal forces from that entity called Incredible India. That's the tagline for our tourism, on which the traveler's gazes are cast, changing and transforming it, constructing and reconstructing it. And here in this slide, I'm using some of the ideas which are prevalent in travel theory, because travel is necessarily seen as an encounter with the other. We'll go on to, talking about that other. Of course, using a term from Edward Said. So one can refer to travelers from other cultures coming into contact with peoples and communities in what has been termed the contact zones, and trying to understand difference or alterity. So, it's this encounter with otherness means something which is unfamiliar. To even assimilate culture in rare cases. And it's not just Edward Said, 1978, who brought in this idea, because we have Montaigne, the 16th century French philosopher and essayist, who argues that travel shows us diversity, variety, otherness in the world, allowing the soul to observe, and this is within quotes, new and unknown things. So somewhere, travel is associated with the unknown, not just the explorers, but even, otherwise. Now, much of what I'm going to talk about is obviously, since it's constructing India, it will be about, all right, travelers from abroad who came in during the colonial period, but it will also be about intra-country travel. And in a way, traveling within India is like moving from one culture, one set of customs, ethnicities, languages to another. And in the late 19th century, when the idea of India was in its very, primary stage, the nascent stage, travelers spoke about moving from one country, Desh, to another. So diversity has been and still is a remarkable cultural component of the Indian subcontinent. So even if we have now so much of communication, so much of air transport, and so many ways in which we come to know about India on the TV, and through, these various pictorial modes. Still, when you do travel and go somewhere, you are struck physically when you travel in space and time, you're still struck by this diversity. So traveling within India is equivalent to becoming aware of physical difference, relating, of course, to the place, to the people, the language, the food, the dress, the way in which they live, and a myriad different things that make up our everyday. So our everyday and their everyday is different. So, yet there is also this feeling of unity that is forged by intra-country travel. And in colonial India, especially the early 20th century, it encouraged the idea of patriotism, a step in the direction of nationalism and freedom. Think of the Dandi March. Think of Vivekananda. Think of the wanderings of Chaitanya. Think of Kabir. So, no, you can go to the next slide. So in this context of otherness, let me talk of a few texts that record the contact with India, its diversity and unfamiliarity. I have chosen two texts. The first is by a Bengali lady, Krishna Bhabini Das, who traveled with her husband to England in 1885. And this is what she writes. So this was at the end of the 19th century, when crossing the Kalapani or the oceans, the Blackwater was forbidden by the xenophobic Hindu, fearing the loss of one's caste. Even more transgressive, I think, was the act of an Indian lady traveling to a foreign country. Travel from early ages was dominated by male activity. Traders, explorers, navigators, adventurers, which necessarily reinforce the masculinity of travel as a human activity. So the constructs of gender, which are entirely, social, relegated woman to domesticity, and in the case of the Indian woman, to the ontopur, to the zanana, essentially hiding behind the veil or the padda. And here was this lady traveling by train from Howrah to Bombay, from east to west, to voyage on a ship further westwards. So she was going to England. And as she looks out of a carriage window, train window, she encounters difference and marvels at what she sees. And if you read through this passage, I'm not going to read it out. She is talking about how she's moving from Allahabad, Mughal Sarai, and other towns of the northwestern region, where she finds a particular kind of people. Then she talks of the Marathis, she talks of Jabalpur, and she says, I'm just taking up a line from here, I was so surprised to see such diversity within the same Bharatvarsh. It occurred to me that if a Bengali, a Marathi, and a person living in the Western province travel somewhere abroad, none would think that all three of them belong to the same country. Because they are different in looks. The second reason being that the three converse in different tongues. The three follow different habits and customs. So how can anyone even think that they are sons of the same mother country? And I'm drawing attention to those last words that she uses. So Krishna Bhabini, the traveler, is constructing diversity in terms of unity as sons of the same mother country. So the idea of integration predominates over separateness. Let's go to the next slide. The other passage that I've chosen is from a Mem Sahib's traveler. to southern India. Julia Maitland, Letters from Madras, published anonymously in 1843, though she was traveling a little earlier, 36, 37, I think. 36 to 42, she was in India. So this is one of several travel accounts about India by women that roughly belong to the same time. So there was, Emily and Fanny Eden. There was Fanny Parks and several others talking about India and Indians. So this is the early, around the 30s, 1830s. And landing in Madras after more than 3 months of long voyage round the Cape of Good Hope, Julia Maitland writes, next slide, please. And she says that they landed in Madras, and she talks of the queer kind of howl and with very small matters of clothes on, but their black skins prevent them. So she's looking at the boatman and she's remarking on that. And the other passage says, the natives are a cringing set, behave to us English as if they were dirt under our feet. And indeed, we give them reason to suppose we consider them as such. Their civility is disagreeable, but the rudeness and contempt with which the English treat them are quite painful to witness. So we are looking at, another India from this perspective. So what is Maitland doing? She's constructing the inhabitants of India on terms of race, referring to the binary of European and native, continuing to contemptuously see them as servile. The loss of human dignity apparently negotiates English attitudes of authority, superiority, and power. Historically, Julia came to India at a time when the British state and politics was infiltrating into the power of the 2-century-old East India Company. She arrived with firm assumptions about race and a conviction that the native heathens needed education and Christianity to civilize them. This was a year after the infamous Minute on Education generated by Thomas Babington Macaulay that advocated creating a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. So travel writing from what is now called the global north created stereotypes that became entrenched in European minds. And I will say that in some writers still, you find that it's changing, but still you find that. And one of these would be the much acclaimed writer, Paul Thoreau, who's the great, Railway Bazaar. That is a book which I find with these notions about Indians, which should be relegated into the background. So the travelers during the company days, transiting into the heydays of the British Raj, constructed an India with views that were radically polarized. Disease, poverty, squalor, ruin existed side by side with luxury, wealth, magnificence, wonder, curiosity. The segregation of these views or prospects was replicated in the layout of towns and cities, where the black town or native quarters were sharply cut off from the white town, the cantonment areas where the British and the Europeans lived. Next slide, please. So to show these two aspects, I chose the City of Dreadful Night. It's, 1899, but it does bring out the unwholesome nature of, the native quarters. And Kipling says, but one cannot rake through a big city without encountering muck. And, yet you have descriptions of Calcutta, around this time or even before as a city of palaces. But here you are looking at, some of these bylanes of Chitpur, which is a, very, Kinji kind of a locality in Calcutta. Wilderness of packed houses, mysterious conspiring tenements that Dickens would have loved. And it talks about the air heavy with faint sour stench, the essence of long neglected abominations. So, you're looking at the native quarters, as it were. And with that, I will go on to the next slide and suggest that this is only a partial view. The European travelers, even the explorers' accounts, project the immense wealth, the exotic oriental splendor of India and its marvelous possessions that was steadily exploited and appropriated by the colonizers in search of resources. So that was the attraction of India, and that is how it was built up. And I will cite here, there are many, many accounts, even the explorer's account, Vasco da Gama's account. Even that, has this idea of wealth and, this magnificence. So this is Emily Eden up the country. And this is written in the form of letters that documents the journey of George Eden, the Governor General, and the entire entourage. The entourage was a 10-mile long procession journeying from Calcutta to Simla. And next slide, I've just taken one of the passages. There are numerous passages like this. The visit to Ranjit Singh of Punjab. So the next slide, that has the others. So it's the gold, it's the jewels, and this is when they saw the Kohinoor, the diamond, the Kohinoor. Ranjit Singh shows it to them. So it's about people, it's about gold, it's about the picturesqueness of what one was seeing. So at the peak of imperialism, British and European travel writers used the techniques of the pictures in painting. And in this case, I would say that Fanny Eden, Emily Eden, they were all painting the people whom they met. And even Ranjit Singh sat for a portrait when Emily Eden was there. So they were using the techniques of the pictures in painting to portray the exotic nature of Indian locales that they visited. And the method of constructing India viewed the people, places, customs as curiosities, combining aesthetics and literary pleasure with the politics of imperialism. The exotic nature of the country was emphasized as being primitive, antique, romantic, needing reshaping by more modern civilizational parameters brought in by the colonizers, primarily the ethics of capitalism and consumerism. In 19th and early 20th century India, there was a proliferation of travel writing about India by Europeans that adjusted itself to this colonial project of desiring knowledge about the land and desiring to appropriate the country. So you will find a large range of these writings in several old libraries and archives. Let's go to the next slide. So at the other end of, I think we've missed a slide, have we? Anyway, yeah, I think the picture didn't come. So at the other end of the colonial prism were the newly educated babus, or middle-class gentlemen, traveling through India after the railways first came into existence in 1859. And the Travels of a Hindu 1869 was written by such a traveler, promoted by the British establishment as being a person surveying India with the eyes of a Hindu, within quotes. And this was a person called Bholanath Chandar, educated at Hindu College, Calcutta, who wrote a travelogue and published it from London. And this is to various parts of Bengal and Upper India, and about his journey from Calcutta to Delhi. Partly it's by train, partly it's by a boat. But his ambivalent identity is reflected in the hybridity of the form of the travel that combines the vision and sensibility of the pilgrim with the scientific rationality derived from his education at Hindu College. He structures his own experience within colonial strategies and binaries, even as he incorporates anecdotes, oral lore, folk tales. That was the Hindu eyes that the British talked about, that were part of his traditional received culture associated with locations and sites. So it's a fairly copious, detailed kind of an account. So let us go to the next slide. Reclaiming, so this is the, hybrid, travelers. Many of them here, I've taken one in intra-country travel, but there were many going abroad. And they were all, or mostly English educated. And they were going to England for professional reasons in most cases. And they had this kind of a hybrid attitude towards Indians. Reclaiming the past of India's glorious civilization was foremost on the nationalist agenda. Travel narratives published in vernacular languages in regional journals contributed to building up national pride, indulging in patriotic sentiments that deprioritized the discourse of colonization and modernity. So here I've named a Bengali lady, Prashannamoyi Chowdhury, writing in 1888, this Bengali travelogue called Aryabhatta, which touched on the patriotic theme of national resurgence. She used travel as a tool to physically encounter and relive the glories of the past, and wrote her remarkable travelogue to vividly resurrect a bygone age in order to envisage a motherland that had been significantly free from political serfdom. So sites of national significance were identified across northern part in Aryabhatta, but in the other travelers, Nivedita, Vivekananda, you have other parts of India as well. So these were the battlefields of Kurukshetra, which was as important as Plassey, fort of Chittor, which carried history, just like the famed mausoleum of Mumtaz Mahal. There was Bodh Gaya, spiritual inspiration, like from places like Varanasi and Gaya, Mathura and Vrindavan. So the idea that travel was the only way in which the vastness of India and its multi-ethnic peoples could be comprehended, that was becoming more and more popular. So we have, these other travelers that we are talking about. We are not specifically talking of any pilgrimage except for Jodhanath Sarvadhikari, but that, he went on foot to Kedarnath and Badrinath from Bengal. But he was actually passing through all these small towns. He didn't have enough money. And it was just the beginning of the railways. He didn't have enough money to get onto a train. And with 13 rupees in his pocket, he went out on this pilgrimage. So pilgrimages have been an intrinsic part of our society, both in the strictly religious sense and in the broader conceptual sense of creating time for meditation. It is a great equalizer, where men and women from various strata of society are traveling together. And let's go to the next slide. I was, very impressed by this, travelogue by Iravati Karve. In a very insightful essay, she says, she was a sociologist and anthropologist. So, she talks very interestingly of all these things. But what I found, this passage that I've quoted, she says that I was getting to know my Maharashtra anew every day. I found a new definition of Maharashtra, the land whose people go to Pandharpur for pilgrimage. And she talks of, all the people coming and joining that pilgrimage from, various parts of Maharashtra. So if you are traveling, you come to know your own country. And then she finds that the people from the Konkan hadn't joined. And she's told that that is because, there is another time when this pilgrimage happens, when these people are not tending their fields. So neither the coastal people nor the plateau people neglected the fields to show their devotion. So she talks about the pilgrimage to Pandharpur as being, central to this idea of knowing Maharashtra. So whether in the hills, across the plains, or on the plateau, pilgrimage journeys continue to this day. The trek may have become easier with modern day transportation. What is lost is the, that community living together, built up based on, the travails that one has encountered together on the road, the shared experiences, the moments of truth and revelation. So, this travelogue is it's not very long, but it's, very interesting. Let us go to the next slide. And, this is a little later, but anyway, talking of this revelation, several of these travel narratives configuring India move into the sheer beauty and strangeness of nature. India has a lot of natural beauty, whether it's the forests, whether it's the waters, the rivers. Here, I'm just talking of the Himalayas. For example, the Himalayas in the north and east of India are a magnificent presence, imposing, mysterious, spectacular, it's all of these. There have been explorers, travelers, pilgrims along the Himalayan trail since early times, who constructed a scientific, empirical, even romantic and spiritual presence of the youngest mountains in the world. We have had travelers like Jodunath Shorvadhikaru, whom I just mentioned, trekking from Hooghly to the Kedarnath and Badrinath in the Garhwal Himalayas. So he's going over the entire gamut of India, the towns, the small towns, and encountering again that cultural otherness to reach the sacred shrines. We have Debendranath Tagore, Rabindranath's father, who in his autobiography, so again, we come to this idea of form, describes the spiritual presences that he feels in the lonely forests of Simla, adding another dimension to the construction of a living natural beauty. But his sojourn is not a Tirtha Jatra, and the idea of Kailash, the mythological abode of the Hindu gods, is secularized into a liberal awareness of a beautiful, mystical, natural environment. So we have, a kind of intercourse with the environment, which is also, part of several of these pilgrimage narratives, especially of early times. Sister Nivedita visualizes the Himalayan regions as a textured history where she talks about Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, actually, coming together in the shrines of the place, various shrines which dot the path. For Joseph Dalton Hooker and Sharat Chandra Das, the Eastern Himalayas and Sikkim, a botanist and geographer, geologist's paradise. They have left major accounts. Hooker, of course, has all these, drawings, and these are all online. And Sharat Chandra Das has this very interesting account of visiting Sikkim and Tibet also. In the Himalayan arc, Journeys East of Southeast, the anthologist Namita Gokhale focuses on, and I'm quoting from her, the entire sweep of mountains that has a shared cultural context, encompassing both indigenous and migratory identities, which manifest in worship, food, habits, cuisines, musical traditions, and folklore, as well as the hardy mountain wisdom of its denizens. That's a quotation. What appeals to me about this idea is not viewing the Himalayas as a sentinel that guards, that's what history has told us, that guards the borders of India, but as a range that spreads across Pakistan, India, Nepal, China, Bhutan, and onto the Myanmar Himalayas, beyond the plateau of Tibet, which is a shared experience that opens up the borders. So we are used to thinking of the Himalayas as guarding our borders, but how if we open it up? So travel is about opening up. As I come to the last part of my talk, I would like to talk generally about how India is being constructed in more contemporary travel writing. Again, I've just taken a few examples. There is a lot of travel writing, especially from Northeast India, which is happening now, and very young writers and very young poets who are, talking about their environment, talking about, their place and, their peoples. I haven't, brought that in because I wouldn't have time. And such writing extends perspectives on the familiar. Think of The City of Jinns by William Dalrymple that takes you through the layered history of Delhi. The 1984 riots and the violence of partition through the experiences of ordinary people the traveler meets, and the presence of the Lodhis, Mughals, British, through the architectural marvels of the legendary city of Indraprastha. I'm sure that you've all read it because you all, belong to Delhi, all right? So historical memory is intertwined with living memory by a peaked, observant gaze. At the other end of the spectrum is, of course, a more controversial writer, which is Naipaul, the diasporic Indian, the ambivalent insider-outsider, who reconstructs India through the controversial trilogy. The Area of Darkness, in 1964, when he first comes to India and is shocked by what he sees there, the country of his ancestors. And that book was also banned, and he looks at the country very negatively. In 1977, he picks up the threads from there. Again, he visits around a little earlier, India, a wounded civilization, and talks about, what colonization has done to it. And he deciphers its servile colonized condition out of which economic resurgence is originating. And in his final book, India, A Million Mutinies Now, 1990, he incorporates oral histories, he recedes into the background, he allows, the ordinary Indian to narrate his, that is Naipaul's ancestral country, arousing some hope and expectation, perhaps. So from such serious appraisals of the country, one can also talk of, I'll just mention two insightful, humorous travelogues like Pankaj Mishra's Butter Chicken in Ludhiana, Travels in Small Town India, that documents small town Mufassal India and portrays its real life and the transformation that the middle class is undergoing. So it's semi-urban India. A similar kind of trend is there. And I think we had a slide where the dates are there. So Bishwanath Ghosh's Chai Chai travels in places where you stop but never get off, about railway travel and the small stations en route. The final destination is the junction, of course. So, this engagement now is not with just an elitist engagement with the center. It is, an engagement with small towns, small places, one's own, known territory as well. So I will be before I end, I would be again asking these two questions. Can globalization and homogenization allow the traveler to focus on the crux of travel? Unfamiliar. We've been talking about the unfamiliar, the other, the different, the idea of alterity. But can globalization and homogenization still allow the traveler to move in unfamiliar domains? The other question that I'm asking, when do ways of seeing translate an exterior journey into a unique personal experience? Not just the pilgrimage of Iravati Kadve, but otherwise also these books that I've been talking about, or any other travelogue that you may know. The exterior journey does become a very, very personal, subjective experience. And the other is, which is the true India? Constructing India, which is the true India? There is a lot of politics in it. And the truth-fiction dichotomy, how does that play out in the act of constructing India during these various historical times and these various epochs, as it were? And I come to the very last now. Shall we go to the next slide? Yeah. I would be talking of the reverse travel, post-colonial. And I have not talked about journeys while I was in my lecture. I have not talked about journeys abroad when one is composing a narrative about a foreign place. I've not taken that entire lot at all. But there were many women writing from regional, in regional languages. There were men writing, of course. So you have, an entire range of, travelers encountering the West, right? So when an Indian travels out, the traveler carries his or her world view that gets, this is the reverse thing that I'm talking about, that gets inscribed into the text. You're not just seeing outside, but knowingly or unknowingly, you're inscribing the self. That is also a construction of India. That is the reverse construction that I'm talking about. And to demonstrate this, I've chosen a unique visual description by a Gond folk artist, Bhajju Shyam, who traveled to London in 2003 and 4. And he drew paintings for what he calls the London Jungle Book. He doesn't know any English. The written portions over there, he has explained orally to two interlocutors, what he has portrayed from his seeing London. He's gone to London. And that is, explained in these drawings. And the entire journey is encapsulated not in written language, it was oral, and in these visuals. And what he's doing is that he is using his tribal symbolic perceptions. It's an entirely, let us put it this way, post-colonial reading of London. And we are coming again and again to the core of travel writing, the encounter and the gaze. Let's go to the other slides. So in this, let me just explain. In this, that is Bhajju Shyam with a suitcase. He's going by train to catch his flight from the areas of Madhya Pradesh, where he lives. And he says that he has drawn himself larger than the train because, he thinks that his thoughts or his ideas are larger than the train itself. So it's flying around. So you see a lot of birds, right? So it's a freedom, it's the thought of traveling, which inspires him. This is very interesting. It says King's Cross Station. And he says that in Gond tribal lore or myth, you have a world under the terrestrial. And here he sees that, the tube or the rails are, below. And in their own mythology, they see the worms all around, right? Worms and snakes. So he's portrayed it like that. And the snakes are all, eating up the spiders. The spiders are the stations, right? So, let's go to the next slide. I just used 3 or 4. This is Big Ben. Big Ben, which keeps time. And in their villages, it's a rooster which keeps time. So he's integrated the two. It's a brilliant book. It's an ironic comment on Kipling's, Jungle Book. And he, conceptualizes London as full of these exotic animals and beasts and birds that he knows. And he portrays it like that. It's not a very large book, it's a slim book, but there are these explanations as well. So, and the last one, I think there's one more slide here. Yes, this is the bus. It's bus number 30, which takes him from King's Cross to his place of work. His work was, he was commissioned by a small restaurant which still exists, I found out, which wanted to use his art in order to attract customers. So it's all over, on the walls. So that was his work. And he has conceptualized the omnibus as a dog, because the dog is man's most faithful companion, even in their tribal areas or in the tribal lore. So that is what he's done. Now, I have chosen here specifically the underground, the bus, and Big Ben, the rail also. Again, we are talking of movement. We are talking of time as well, temporality. And, these symbols, these ideas, these thoughts of this tribal artist come together in this very unique travel book. And you also see the travel book, we have been talking about narratives. This is also a narrative, but it's a visual narrative that we are looking at. So the travel book is essentially, as I said, travel is protean, travel book is even larger. And travel is therefore the most amazing of experiences. It is not a passive absorption of the unfamiliar. The traveler is the agent of change. And I will end with the words of Rabindranath Tagore in his Pulingo. We live in a limited world, enclosed by what is familiar. An unseen world is close by, vaster and stranger. Messages between the two speak in a shadowy meter. The wail of a distant flute, the scent of a nameless flower. So it's the romance of travel and the excitement of travel, which I think is expressed in this very short verse from Tagore's Pulingo or Sparks. So thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for your time. So that's all.
Shubhra?
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for the talk. It was very informative and I'm sure it'll help us in the future.
Yes,
Sure,
thank
ma'am.
you.
Moksha?
Moksha, it is Poonam,
Just a
ma'am.
minute, Poonam ma'am will finish. There's a
No,
slide.
Shall we take
Alright.
shall we
Not
take
at
the
all, not
slides
at all.
off? Share screen.
No, I
Can we
just-
close the share screen.
No, the principal is just going to join. He's just asked me to inform him once Jayati is finished speaking. Hanji,
Have
sir,
I
aap join,
overstepped my
please.
time?
Sir, please join.
Have I overstepped my time?
No,
Not
no,
at all.
Jayati, no, Jayati.
Not at all.
Right. I was scared about that.
So the principal is just joined. The principal is here and he would like to speak a few words. He had actually joined, while Jayati was speaking. So he said, I won't interrupt the speaker. In fact, we're on another meeting right now. He said, he's only telling me, Madhumita ji, that the speaker has finished. So let me join now.
Okay.
Welcome, sir.
Just a minute. Has he? The may I now invite our principal, Dr. Masroor Ahmed Beg, to please say a few words. Sir, you're muted, I think, or your volume. Sir?
Dr. Madhumita, are you comfortable now?
Yes, sir. But we can't see
Can
you.
you hear me?
We can only see Pashi. Yeah, now we can see you clearly, sir.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. I first of all beg apology to Professor Jayati Gupta for being since I was convening another meeting, another Matrabhasha Divas meeting. So both are scheduled at 4 o'clock. Namaskar, madam.
Namaskar.
I have a great regard for you. The only thing is that since at 4 o'clock another meeting was already going on,
I know.
started. So that is the kind of a thing. Though it was unintentional, and they started early rather, so I had to join that. Welcome, ma'am, to Zakir Hussain College online webinar. In fact, I'm so much delighted to express my idea that the Department of English Literary Society, in association with IQSE, is organizing this conference on constructing India travelers writing. I have heard you, ma'am, fully, because there I had to make a choice, and I could only
Yes, of
just
course.
the few words, and then I kept listening to you, because I was told that you have taught two of my eminent faculty members. One is Dr. Shubhra Ray, and another is Dr. Madhumita Chakrabarti. So your product is the evidence of your ability and capability. So,
Yes.
though I am
Surely.
known that you must be, I think, senior to me also, perhaps, as they consider. But you
Yes,
have been,
I'm old.
I'm also old. The only thing is that the retirement age in Delhi University is 65. That is why I'm in chair. Otherwise, by this time, I would have been in.
I've retired now for 10 years now. From my university, I've retired 10 years back.
Okay, ma'am. So that way also you are very senior to me. So high regard to you. And you have spoken extempore on the subject. And it was very enlightening. And I must request you that please do visit our college. Our college will be blessed by your visit because the corona is still in place.
Yes.
Otherwise, we would have organized offline conference. But certainly, once we were allowed to hold such kind of a gathering assembly of large number of students, faculty members, because we have got very big auditorium having 500, more than 500 capacity. So, madam, you are in Calcutta or in Delhi?
Calcutta. No, I'm in Calcutta.
Okay, ma'am. So as and when the things will improve further,
yes.
We would love to see you here, and all of my students, faculty members, as they have been benefited now, they will benefited in future also. Thank you, ma'am, for joining this conference. Another meeting is already on, so I have taken a leave from there for an intermittent period. Another meeting is already going.
Meeting. I'm sure that you are very busy. With all this administrative work. So thank you very much for at least coming, and we were able to meet virtually. So thank you very much for inviting me. And yes, Shubhra and Madhumita have been my students, so it's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so nice of you for giving me two brilliant faculty members, and they are providing brilliant ideas about the constructing India travelers and writing. It was a nice interaction of yours with all faculty members and students, and I'm sure that this kind of associations shall continue in near future also. Thank you, ma'am, for coming
Thank
to
you.
the online, ma'am. Thank you very,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Namaste. Shubhra, there are some questions, I think, in the
Yeah.
chat box.
Yes, ma'am. We'll just wait for Poonam to round up the thing, and then our
Sure.
students
Okay.
will be taking
Okay.
up the question answers. Yes.
Okay.
Over to you, Poonam. Poonam, you're muted.
It's been marvelous to hear. I mean, the kind of exposure you gave us to so many different writers, their books, and the areas. It would be, for us fascinating because it's recorded that we can go over it again and again. The names that you took, the writers, and I'm sure because in the chat it would be clear about how many different ideas it threw up in people's mind. When you began with Francis Bacon and certain others, I was reminded of this essay by George Steiner, where he talks about this civilizing gentleman, and so the tour of Europe was something that was mandatory.
Yeah.
And then, of course, going on to so many other writers that you named, and even travel journeys, train journeys, and their whole collections by people who, ever since the trains made it possible for them. So there are, travel writers who have been writing, especially about train journeys. Well, thank you so much. I mean, yes, thank you as Dr. Baig said, thank you for these two faculty members of ours. They are gems. You have to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Poonam,
Not at all.
for your vote of thanks and this thing. I just wanted to, because it's just not possible to encapsulate the various kinds of travel in one lecture. So I just thought that maybe this will open up ideas or thoughts among the students about how to get around travel or travel. What is it all about? So I just.
In fact, maybe Shubhra and Madhumita may have told you that we do have a paper as part of the graduation course, which is devoted to travel writing. And,
We used to, Poonam. I
used to,
shared the paper with
Yes.
her, but we no longer have it. Yes.
Yeah. I saw that's part of the CBCS course. So
LOCF,
many places do have that. They begin with Al-Biruni and Ibn Battuta.
Ibn Battuta, yes.
Yes, they begin with that. Authors whom we have seen in the history of in history books as sources of history. So it begins over there and it moves on, right?
Of course, it doesn't have the kind of diversity that you made us aware of.
Yeah, but nowadays a lot of travel books are coming out, and about small places, which amazes me. So one finds interest in these small places, many of them from the Northeast. And then I was reading one very recently, very well written, about Hazaribagh, which happens to be my early parental home. Bihar. And there is so it's now it's Jharkhand. Yeah. So very interesting, right?
Thank you, Poonam. Could I request Moksha to please take over for the question answer session?
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for this talk. It was very informative, and I'm sure it will help us a lot. Now I'll go in with the questions. The first one is from our professor, Anas Tabrez. Do you see the relationship between the traveler and space as a gendered relationship? What would you say then about the difference between a woman narrator as opposed to a male. Also, the white woman as opposed to the Indian one. Are there differences in modes of construction there?
Yes, yes, very definitely. First of all, travel writing, by women, they look at different things from the men. I'm talking about even, 19th and 20th century, travel. And the way in which a woman would look at the world around her and the things that she will look at will be very different. So there is a difference over there. The space which opens up for the men and for the woman. And the other part of the question was about the Mem Sahib and the Indian woman. Absolutely different, because the Mem Sahibs were, in a way, part of the colonial project. When they were coming to India, they were part of that culture. They were part of that colonial project. And, whether implicitly, they were subscribing to the notions of separateness, difference, race, which made up the, British or Raj ideas about, places and things. There are some exceptions over there. For example, you can say Fanny Parks, she writes A Pilgrim in Search of the Picturesque, that's a beautiful book, well illustrated. She, around the same time as Fanny and Emily Eden. And, she has this kind of interest in things which are exotic. She begins with a Ganesh Stuti at the beginning of her, book. So, all that kind of thing. So that going native kind of thing, which was happening with her. And she came from a different social background from the Edens, who were, Governor General. And so, they were the hostesses of the Governor General and that. And the Indian woman, those who were writing, all of them were not writing, but those who were writing, the Indian woman, especially in the age of the Mem Sahibs that you were talking about, were in a sense privileged, because they had some home learning, perhaps not in English in most times, so they were writing in the vernacular. Obviously they are curious about Mem Sahibs, British woman, when they went abroad also, that is happening. And there is a cultural difference which they notice, right? And there is also a critique that they make of, European woman or British woman or English woman, and the kind of freedom that they enjoy, which they think is not essentially what they would like to emulate in their own environments. So Krishna Bhabini Das, is the first Bengali woman to write a full-fledged travelogue on England. And there are chapters on it. Whether she was helped by her husband or not, that remains a matter of debate. But also, about, Krishna Bhabini, I will say that she was the first woman and the only woman during that time, say the late 19th to early 20th century, who wore a gown and took off her veil in order to go to the West, all right? So she wanted to, in a way, assimilate herself with the environment. So that's also, remarkable, but there are no pictures of, the lady in her European dress. Right. I hope, that answers the question that you've asked.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll go forward with the next one.
Yes.
Shubhra ma'am also has a couple of comments to make.
Okay.
Jayati, you titled your talk Constructing India. And I was just thinking how travel writing can serve as an antidote to the kind of monolithic construction of India that happens from time to time, depending on the political dispensation. So I was thinking of Anquetil Duperron here. We've forgotten about him, but he came to India in 1754, much before the celebrated arrival of William Jones in 1783 and his founding of Asiatic Society, right? And I was thinking of the fact that Europe gets introduced to the Upanishads via Anquetil Duperron's Latin translation from Persian of the Upanishads.
Yes.
It's interesting that he goes on to read the Upanishads in Sanskrit much later. And the fact that, these ideas were being spread, I mean, his research historique, for instance, it comes out from Berlin, it gets published in 1789. And then again, the other works come out from Paris.
Right.
He's forgotten. I mean, of course, Raymond Schwab brings him back to the Anglophone world, and Said, of course, celebrates him as the first Orientalist, the first French Orientalist. But the idea that Upanishads are getting introduced in Persian in Latin, translated from Persian, that obviously gives you an idea as to how one can have a probably reverse reconstruction, rather than going along with a certain monolithic idea of India that is being put in place. The other, I was thinking of, again, constructing India, but by women travelers, Horiprabha Takeda, Japane Bongo Mohila, a Bengali woman in Japan, and Hemlata Sarkar, Nepale Bongo Mohila, a Bengali woman in Nepal, and two very different kinds of construction. So while Hemlata takes pride in the fact that India is more advanced, especially when she compares with the poverty in Nepal, for Horiprabha Takeda, what becomes comforting when she visits Japan, for her, it's her sasural, it's her in-laws place. And what is disconcerting for us, but what is, in a certain sense, comforting for her, is that she finds submission of women being a normative. And amidst all the exoticization of Japan, she finds that, in a certain sense, to be her source of mooring. So very different kinds of construction of India in place. And that, this is not a question, this is more in the nature of a comment, but I was just thinking how travel writing, because of its protean nature, which you naturally mentioned, how it, in a certain sense, has the capability of deconstructing and subverting a certain monolithic construction of India.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not monolithic at all. And even in, this age of globalization, it cannot become homogeneous.
Exactly.
Globalized or homogeneous. So I'm very happy with the new travel writing, which is, coming out constantly, because obviously it shows that, it's a very vibrant kind of, writing, or a vibrant kind of interaction with people's places, small towns, or whatever. So this, and yes, what you were talking about the Upanishads being translated, and Persian, and it's also, one can talk of traveling cultures along with travelers. Cultures also travel and get imbibed, as it were. So that is what's happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very interesting observation. Yeah.
The next question is also from Anas sir, and he asked about the name of the Gond artist whose pictures you shared.
It's a person called Shyam Bhajju, Shyam Bhajju Shyam. And interestingly, his grandfather was, a worker, or personal assistant of Verrier Elwin, who had married a Gond woman. So, and another thing which I found, when I was, reading this, I've been, at it for some time, because I found it very, very fascinating, is the fact that, this restaurant, I went online to, see this restaurant in London, one area. The kind of murals, or these kind of paintings, Gond paintings that he did over there, that place is considered to be a place which will, attract because of its exotic nature, or exotic decor, attract, people, and especially children, right? Now, it is, given me, some food for thought kind of thing, because each of these things that Bajushan is painting, he has an explanation, which is an in-depth, explanation of the tribal symbolism, which he's using in order to understand and, visualize or write about or narrate London, for his, for his own people, right? And in the last, picture which he has drawn, he, everyone comes to see him in his village. And because he's, gone out and he's come back and with these new experiences, and he is seen as a bard sitting in the middle. And he says that, it has given him the power to talk or narrate, as it were, all right, this travel that he has done. So, these are all, very interesting concepts which, come up. And that's why I wanted to end with that, and it breaks with the linearity of the travel narrative. The colonial travel narrative is broken by, the use of these symbols and, this kind of narration. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
The next question is from Minakshi Sharma, who, sorry. She thanks you and asked, to what extent would you say a travel narrative is also a visual narrative, especially in terms of a traveler's gaze? And in what ways would you consider the two, that is travel narrative and visual narrative, different, if at all?
See, there are two medium, or, two modes of narration, right? The one that I, showed you, that those visuals, so that's, an extreme thing that we are looking at. See, the early travel narratives, before the time of photography, they use the narrative itself, the language itself, to, mimetically almost describe things, including, several of the, in the vernacular also, the several pilgrimage narratives that I have read. They try to bring alive the, not just the inner feeling, but they try to bring alive the entire environment of the place through language. Slowly, one finds that, I'm talking especially now of women's travel narratives, which I've read closely, you find that Indian women, they are able to reproduce in their, usually these came out in journals, the picture postcards that they would have got, or the, by that time, a little bit of photographs that, could be incorporated. So you have, that kind of thing. But for the English Mem Sahibs, they were actually, They were actually drawing, painting, drawing constantly. So you have Fanny Parks, you have Emily Eden, you have Fanny Eden, you have, several other of these ladies who are sketching, drawing, and those are all available now, online digital libraries, archives. So you can see a lot of them. So they were drawing. So the visual, went in those narratives, the visual went along with others. It's much later that photographs came in especially in Indian, this thing. Indian travel narratives. And initially, as I said, the subject would not be there. Then you had the subject over there. So you see a change, also, happening in that. And sometimes there would be maps, like this Bengali lady who traveled to England in 1936. She has a map and she has photographs at Egypt, the pyramids, etc., which she has used. So even there, there is a kind of transition. But photography was a colonial mode in that sense of the term, technology, colonial mode. So the narrative, when you have photography and the picture postcards, etc., the narrative is supplemented by that. In the case of the sketches and paintings of the Mem Sahibs, I will say that it is not supplemented or complemented, but it is also a reading, exoticized perhaps, and sometimes a curious reading of the native. All right. And in the case of this visual narrative that I was showing you, this post-colonial visual narrative, there is no narrative. There is just the oral perception, which has been now, the translator has, put that together from what the person has said. So for Baju Sham, the entire narrative of travel is actually a visual, aspect, oral visual, tribal, therefore. That's the tribal mode that he has actually used. Right.
The next question is, you mentioned the Great Railway Bazaar, where the writer has regarded his travel through the Indian subcontinent as a hippie trail. Would you say that the difference in perspective of a traveler to that of a resident contribute towards a distorted reflection of the history of the place?
Yes, the way one is traveling, or what one is seeing, is essentially because of the nature of the traveler, or the purpose of the traveler. Paul Thoreau, makes these immense journeys from through the Siberian railways, etc., and then he comes to India and Asia, and he travels through Asia. The perspective is, I think, a little less sympathetic than that of many others. Say, if you want to compare William Dalrymple with him, or William Dalrymple, of course, lives here now, or lives for large parts of the year now. He's a historian. But Paul Thoreau is a travel writer who has been much acclaimed. But his views of India are somehow, more negative, or more superficial, I would say, than that of many others. Yeah.
The next question is, to improve one's travel writing, is it important or necessary to have an on-field experience, or one can use his imagination to describe it?
See, I said in the very beginning that the kind of travel writing that I was going to talk about is about real experience, real experiences, real travel through space and through time. You can write imaginary travel, that would be a more meditative, a more interiorized kind of a travel.
Christian,
SK Pottipat Malayalam में लिखते थे,
experience,
तमिल में।
or you're going somewhere and experiencing the people, even if you've read about it, even nowadays, if you've seen it on the TV, and all that kind of thing, even then, it does make a lot of difference, I think, the writing.
I wonder if there is any book which would make us aware of travelogues by Indian writers writing in regional languages.
There's not any single book. There are many things coming out now. 2 or 3 of these, one was brought out from the Sahitya Academy travel conference, which was held in Goa around 2002 or something, and Shobhana Bhattacharya has edited that. So that is about Indian travel narratives. Then you have Professor Sachidanandan, who has talked about India and empire. That's, again, a collection of essays. Then you have from Vishwabharati, Somdatta Mondal, she has brought out, essays, collection of essays, 2 collection of essays. One came out in 2020 and one was earlier on Indian travel narratives. So you have, collections like that. A single book on Indian travel writing is not possible because of the regional, you have to take up each region. For me, I'm taking up Bengal. I do a lot of reading and writing within that also. But I don't know Marathi or Gujarati to take it up. But about Bengal, this much I can say that, especially for women's travelogues, that was the first time that woman, started writing, and especially in journals, and got published. And so it was one, early on, because when I went to Karnataka, I went to the, National Archives over there, their equivalent of the National Archives, and the librarian told me that there would be no women's writings before, say, the 1950s or 60s. So education had a lot to do with that as well. So that. Any other questions?
How would you see Rani Mahalanobis's account of their European travels with Tagore?
Obviously, many people, Tagore was a great traveler. Tagore was a great traveler. He went to the most obscure of places, and within India, outside India. So he was a great traveler, and often, he had people going with him. And yes, Rani Mahalanobis talks about that, but the personality of Tagore, or the perceptions of Tagore, who was, otherwise, as I said, traveling in Japan, and traveling in China, and, traveling in Vietnam. So she was, she was imbibing some parts of, Tagore's perceptions also of what she saw. Obviously, I'm not saying, she's copying or anything like that, but the presence of Tagore was, so large and imposing that, this could naturally happen. The other, a person who went with Tagore on his Japanese visit was, of course, the artist Munishi De. He was a young boy at that time, and he was taken there so that he could learn, painting by these Japanese painters, and come back and teach in Shantiniketan. So, Rabindranath did have these people along. Also, in the case of Rani Chandu, whose husband Anil Chandu was a personal assistant of Rabindranath for a long time. She also, writes about her travels. And she has several travelogues written in Bangla. I don't know whether these have been translated. And she has obviously a perception which is partly a perception which has been shaped by her stay in Shantiniketan, and the fact that the Dey family, Monishi Dey, Shuhash Dey, they were her brothers. So there is a kind of pictorial, descriptive way in which she writes a travelogue. So, these do count. Each travelogue takes on, let us put it that way, the personality of the traveler. Not the place, but the traveler, and the traveler, what the traveler sees and encounters and wants to talk about and wants to remember. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. There are no more questions.
I think there was someone, Poonam was asking whether there is a translation of Horiprabha Takeda's book.
I think that's Meenakshi Malhotra. Yes.
Yes, of course there is. There is a translation brought out as recently as 2015, I think, by the Jadavpur University Press. So there is a translation now. And before that, I don't know. No, I don't know of any other translation.
Yeah. Am I on mute?
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Meenakshi Malhotra. I was wondering because Professor Gupta, I've read your book. And in fact, I was very impressed, you conceptualized this whole space as Global South. So in fact, at the beginning, you said that you were going to be theoretical, but without making it very obvious and overt. And I was wondering at the generic tensions. So when Rani Mahalanobis is writing, is she being hagiographic? Very often these writings are autobiographical also. Krishna Bhavini Das, which I have read. In fact, both Shomdatta Mandal's translation and Nabunita Sengupta's translation. I happen to be reviewing them for different journals.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I found that your take was very, very good and very comprehensive. And you suggest, there's this whole thing of how travel writing itself becomes a genre which is justified through the whole idea of religion and religious pilgrimage to a more secular mode of travel as the sort of, reform and the construction, how Bengali women are sort of differently constituted and constructed through the course of the 19th century. So I think a lot comes across, but I was wanting some kind of theoretical comment on the generic tensions in the travelogue itself.
See, generic tensions, the point is over here that it's commonly believed that the women were writing and the men were writing. I'm talking about Bengal also mainly. They were writing, and the travelogues were modeled on the European travelogues or the British travelogues, and there was no such form in India. But the form of travel telling, storytelling, which existed in India, part of it, orally, and part of it through, the folk traditions and folk traditions and in Bengal, the Mongol kabbos and, that kind of thing. I am sure that it has left some kind of impact. And that impact is in some cases, like, for example, this Bholanath Chandur, whom I mentioned, it is an impact on the form itself, the ambivalence of the form. In the case of the, woman travelers writing in Bangla, they are in a position where they are trying to also, shape their own identities. And in doing that, they are using techniques and forms which seem to be more rational, at least, in the form, they are, moving from one place to another, or, looking at one thing to another, and all that kind of thing. But there is some degree of this anecdotal narration, this familiarity with Indian customs that they, want to juxtapose against these other kinds of customs. So, that is happening, or that creates, let us say, the generic tensions within, the form or within the narrative. And if we are looking at the Persian, like I'm talking of 1765, Ittasamuddin, I have looked at some so-called Hajj pilgrimages by Bengalis written in Bangla, which are using the format of the Safarnama, which is essentially a Persian form. And there was this book in the National Library, Bangla, which starts from the back, right? And it goes on in the same way, eulogizing the family or giving the family background before, moving into actually the Hajj travel. So it will change from one to another. And as I said, Rani Maulanabish, that you mentioned, she was part of, partly, I think, I wouldn't say imposed upon, but, partly she was under the influence or under the larger personality of those with whom she was traveling. So it's possible, in those cases, that the self or the subjectivity gets compromised to a certain extent. I hope that answers your question. And, the generic form is very, very flexible and changeable, as it were. Because, see, Debindranath's travel bit is part of an autobiography, and he's essentially talking about the growth of his mind, but it's about travel. So, it gets integrated into, these places. Yes. Any other questions?
I think that brings us to an end to the question and answer session. Could I now request Moniska, our student, to deliver the vote of thanks, please?
Ma'am, am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Visible, I can't see her. I want to see her.
Okay. On behalf of the English Literary Society and the Department of English, Delhi College Evening, I extend a heartfelt thanks and gratitude to Professor Jayati Gupta for taking time out of a very busy schedule and for dignifying the occasion. Everyone present here today is feeling encouraged by your empowering and motivating words, and it was indeed an illuminating experience for all of us. I thank our principal, Professor Masroor Ahmed Beg, for always supporting and encouraging us in all the activities that we conduct in our department. I also want to thank all the teachers for their guidance and cooperation. We are blessed to have such a dedicated team of our department that went all out in making this event a success. Most importantly, I thank our audience, friends, faculty members, and students from across Delhi University and elsewhere who have joined us today on Zoom and as well as on Facebook Live. We will be back with another lecture next month. Thank you all once again. We wish you all a very lovely evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very
We
much.
need to click a photograph, Shubhra.
Yes, Madhumitadi, you'll be able to do it. So
Yeah,
could we
but
all
I'm
please
in
switch
the
on our
other meeting, so I'm just, switching between meetings. So if everybody can switch on their cameras.
please switch on your cameras, everyone.
Yeah. It was a nice session. Thank you. Thank you to the students. Thank you to all the faculty who attended, and thank you for the questions.
Thank you, Jayati. It was
Yeah.
like back in the classroom, and as enlightening as ever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Students, those of you who I can see on the screen, please do turn on your cameras. I'll take this. Thank you so much, Jayati once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and having
No,
me.
it's a pleasure, and we hope to see you physically soon. Next time,
Yes,
maybe
but-
when I'm in Kolkata, I'll call you and I'll try and come and meet you.
Yes, of course. Of course. So bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Jayati.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So can I leave now?
Yes,
Yes,
thank you.
Yes, Jayati. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Bye.
Bye. Madhumitadi, will you officially end the meeting?
Yes, I'm ending the meeting.